Hey there, welcome back to the Complicated Kids podcast. I'm your host, Gabrielle Nicolay, and today I'm joined by Ed Thompson. Ed, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
You have written a very interesting book and you have a very interesting company. And so we're going to talk about both of those today. But first, introduce yourselves. Tell us how you got here. What are you doing? Why would I invite you on this podcast?
Yes, I'm Ed Thompson, CEO and founder of a company called Uptimize. And we are really the leading training company for organizations looking to learn more about neurodiversity. And ultimately, as we look at it, to embrace all of their different types of thinkers. I've also written a book about my journey and our company's journey, everything we've seen and learned. It's partly, what is this? It's partly, why are we all talking about this now? It's partly, what can you do about it? Called A Hidden Force, Unlocking the Potential of Neurodiversity at Work.
I love it. Okay, so what is Uptimize? Why did you create it? And which came first, book or company?
The company came first, and actually, to some extent, I was inspired to write the book by some of the stuff that we were seeing as we worked with organizations and the impact, the change, often the emotional response, where you have neurodivergent people for the first time in an organization that vocally cares about them. And it's quite an amazing thing to think about, but you will have adult neurodivergents who've been through education and so on and been in organizations that say, look, we're super inclusive and super diverse, but they've never, ever, ever heard that genuine enthusiasm towards different thinking styles. So the story of the company, story of the book, it's all intertwined. I found myself about 10 years ago working for a tech company in London, and I was working for the CEO. And I saw firsthand what they say these days, which is that HR priorities have become CEO priorities. So the things that were keeping my boss up at night were, we can't hire fast enough. We can't how do we build a team that maybe looks different, thinks differently? You know, there was a sense that our team is a bit samey. Again, we couldn't hire fast enough. So how do you just build this 21st century workforce? That was his driver, and we didn't have all the answers, but that got me involved very strategically in some diversity initiatives. And it was interesting there to see the impact not only on the people who we connected with careers, but really the impact on the organization itself, the energizing that comes with people who have different backgrounds, different perspectives and so on. You see this diversity of thought unleashed. You see people proud to work somewhere that's truly connecting with its community. So I wanted to do more of that. Because I'd had a traumatic brain injury myself, and I have neurodivergent family, I got interested in what was then the very, very, very embryonic world of what's now called neurodiversity at work. So organizations paying attention to the fact that we all have different brains. 20% of people may be neurodivergent in some way. And this is a bigger story in the book, but for thousands of years, nobody's paid any attention to this. These things have only got consciousness and some medical labeling over the last 100, 150. Neurodiversity as a term only emerged in the 90s. So no surprise, but this is where we are. We find ourselves in the 21st century as organizations, knowing that people are our most important asset, knowing to some extent intuitively the major tool that they all bring to work every day is their brain, and yet not truly paying attention to the fact that all of those brains are different and so on. I think missing out on fulfilling some of those commitments around diversity in people that we see organizations make, and also missing out on some of that innovative potential where we get people together who truly think in different ways.
As you were talking, I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, go for it.
I was thinking about some of the schools in which I work where inclusion is a very big theme. And what we know about inclusion in schools that we seem to ignore on the back end, and you're doing your work to combat this, is that inclusion is good for both the included and the includers, right? Like everybody benefits from a diversity of perspective, of ways of being, of perceiving the world, of thinking, of all of those things, when there's adequate support in place for that to happen, right? When the culture is set up for everybody to succeed. But the benefits are tremendous. And so if we sort of fast forward, it's so interesting to me as you were talking, like we know this in education. This is an educational principle. And yet then you graduate usually from high school. Colleges are starting to get on board. And then if you're neurodivergent, then what? You have to go into hiding. Basically, you mask all day long. Yeah. And so can you give an example of, I wonder if you have an example from the book or otherwise of like how what you're doing has had an impact, or how it works even?
Yeah, so we provide training of different types, building awareness of neurodiversity. We find that 60% of people or so are pretty open that they don't even know the term and don't know what it means. Mm-hmm. And that's backed up by some quite alarming data that suggests 50% of people wouldn't feel comfortable, in their own words, or albeit in an anonymous survey, hiring or managing somebody who's neurodivergent. So
okay, stop.
There's really
50%.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you have 90% of people masking. So no surprise, 90% are masking. I mean, if you told me that 50% of people in America don't want to work with a British person, I would be masking and doing my worst American accent to get by. I mean, I know I'm being silly, but that, it's not difficult to see how those things relate.
Yeah. Okay, we have to define masking for just a second. Sorry.
Yeah.
Masking means hiding any kind of what might be perceived as weird behaviors or mannerisms in public that don't feel natural to the person who has a neurodivergent brain. So for some people that means tapping their foot or chewing on whatever. So for some people that means not making direct eye contact because it helps you think better. So there's any number of behaviors that neurodivergent people feel that they're required to put on. I actually love your analogy of the accent, because it would be completely unnatural for you to speak to me in an American accent. And yet that's what we're asking neurodivergent people to do.
Yes, I think part of I allude to this with the title of the book, A Hidden Force, is we find today, the organizations we work with are typically very conscious of the importance of their people, of the importance of the commitment they make to their people, and being a workplace where everybody can thrive is one of the sort of buzz phrases.
Yeah.
The link between their people and their ability to succeed commercially around psychological safety, collaboration, leading to innovation and so on. But there's this blind spot around neurodiversity and neurodiversity at work that is, again, often hidden, which is why it's remained a blind spot for so long. And I think people don't realize how many people are applying for jobs perfectly qualified and being filtered out, unintentionally excluded for reasons like you alluded. Maybe they struggle with a poorly formatted and stressful timed application form, or they're interviewed by somebody who doesn't know anything about neurodiversity and assumes because they speak in a sort of flat affect that they're not really interested or whatever. So that whole chunk of, the people that we're not hiring that we could and should, that's a truly hidden symptom. So we have this blind spot, we just don't know that this is happening. And I'm going to come to your question about, story in a second around that. And then at work, again, if 90% of people are choosing not to disclose, and disclosing in theory has all sorts of benefits, you can be yourself and you can get access to the support you need, but most people are choosing not to do that because they're worried about how people are going to respond. And again, look, 60% of people don't know what this is. You're certainly risking some ignorant responses. So you see how that's happening. So again, all that part is hidden as well. And occasionally it bubbles up, and occasionally we see organizations say, look, we have had some incidents, we've had some conflict, we've had people leave, people disclose, and then say, look, I can't work here. So that's the sort of lava coming out of the volcano. But there really is this big volcano that I think organizations are just waking up to. And we see it when we interview people in the community, and they tell us the same sorts of stories of not being able to get hired for those reasons, or not being appreciated by their manager, not being able to work their best, and so on. So, of course, back to your question, what we're trying to do is to change that. And we're trying to change not just workplaces, but in a sense, workforces, to being places where everybody can unlock this empathy and compassion that we all have. It's just a question of, are we allowing this out and allowing this to shape our interactions, where everybody is sensitive to the fact that we all experience the world and experience the workplace differently. We all have different preferences of how we work, how we problem solve, how we communicate, and so on. And just trying to create that team environment where that's the case. And you asked for a story. There's one I talk about in the book around hiring, and it's around this point of how easy it is not to hire the best talent. So it was a company, we were about to work with them, and it was actually the learning and development team, and we were talking to them about selling them our training, and they wanted to have a look at it first to see if they liked it, right? So they've all gone through the training, and then we circle back, and they said, we really liked it, and actually we've almost got a testimonial for you already, because it so happens we've been hiring into our team, and so we got some resumes, and one person had by far the best resume, but this person was a little awkward in interview, didn't really make rapport necessarily. And it's the kind of person, and they were very honest, they said, the kind of person we probably wouldn't have hired had we not done the training. So they were pretty honest that the person with the best resume would have been looked over. Right? But because they'd just done the training, they were able to ask questions that allowed this person to explain what they'd done to be successful in the past, what they needed from colleagues, what they needed from managers, and so on. And in the end, they did hire that person. But I find that sort of, on the one hand, a great story, on the one hand, a very salutary tale of how easy it is for organizations to exclude the best candidates. And it's a very, very difficult message to get to organizations, because everyone in an organization, by definition, has been hired by that organization, and therefore thinks, well, they can't be doing a bad job because, that I got in there. So, they must be doing something right. So it's very difficult to tell them that actually you're not hiring the best talent.
Yeah, I think what's so interesting about this is it makes me think of other areas in which the diversity, forgive me, do you consider yourself part of the diversity, equity, and inclusion movement? Is that where you fall when you're talking to companies, or is it something else?
It's a really good question. I think we do, because although this is kind of a multi-layered topic in a way, again, look, everybody has a different brain. That's what neurodiversity means. That's humans have different brains. There's no one normal brain. So I think the potential here is to get to a point where any team or any organization, by definition neurodiverse, is able to embrace that, acknowledge it, and capitalize on it. So ultimately, I think neurodiversity at work becomes a collaboration topic, almost an innovation topic as well. It's about how do we all get the best out of each other. But I think we have to start, to some extent, with recognizing that because we haven't talked about this, and because societies and workplaces have simply defaulted to the norms of the so-called neurotypical majority, that there has been acute marginalization of people who have less common thinking styles. And I think we have to acknowledge that, and I think we have to combat that as a first step. So for me, there's a sort of inclusion and diversity inclusion phase to this, where we acknowledge, look, we're committed to these things partly from an equity perspective as well as an upside perspective. And this simply hasn't been equitable.
Yeah.
So I think that for me, that's sort of the urgent piece.
Yeah.
But I do think there's something that goes beyond, particularly with this topic, where it does technically involve everybody, because again, it's everybody's brain. How do we create those teams that just have this in their DNA, that they celebrate the fact that they don't all think alike?
Yeah. Okay, 2 questions, take them however you want. Number 1, what is the upside? Here's the question. How hard do you have to work to convince companies that there's a financial upside, not just like, this is a nice thing to do? And how do you handle the naysayers, who I'm sure inevitably there's always one, at least. So 2-part question, maybe.
Yes, I think it was something. It's almost the same. We start by looking at all of the things the organization's already committed to, that they've already identified are important, they're already working towards. And it's not difficult to find, again, as I said, HR priorities have become CEO priorities. You look at annual reports, you see organizations, you see C-suite leaders talk about their priorities being, how do we keep people, 1 in 4 employees voluntarily leaving every year? That's a bit of a crisis. It's expensive as well. How do we attract the best talent, particularly in the tighter labor market of the later 2010s? That was a huge priority. That's going to come back. How do we innovate? The lifespan of companies is plummeting. Used to be 50, 60 years. So, organization, this idea of it sort of being an unsinkable oil tanker, just kind of cruising along. Now, if you're not innovating, someone else is going to disrupt you. So that's no longer a buzzword. That's no, we need to be innovating, or someone's going to out-innovate us and we're going to go the way of Kodak and so on. So they already, I think, get a lot of this stuff. I think what we try to do is just join some dots for them to say, look, are we thinking about our people in this way? Yeah. And actually, here's a huge way where we can live into some of those promises you've made around inclusivity and belonging and so on. But also there's some upside here around productivity. You mentioned masking. So what happens if people are truly able to bring their true self to work? Again, it's something that they already aspire to. Mm-hmm. They recognize that if you can bring your full self to work, you're more likely to stay, you're more likely to be productive. But are they seeing that this is a blind spot there where people aren't doing that? Are they aware of neurodivergent masking and so on? And then in terms of innovation, we've seen organizations put billions into research and development. But actually, are you conscious of the fact that it is people ultimately who are driving innovation? And we do that either from the brilliance and insights of individuals, of whom neurodivergent people are famously creative. And we do that through what we call diversity of thought, which is different people, different perspectives, pulled together, wisdom of crowds, and you up the chance of innovative outcomes. Mm-hmm. So I think you anchor it in what they already believe and what they already want, and you show them this is a path to delivering those things.
It strikes me, I love everything you're saying. And again, I'm always interested in the naysayers. Are there people who say, yeah, it's just too much work, it's too hard? And perhaps are there also people you've worked with where they just don't have the emotional intelligence, or they're not willing to do the work to see past? Because I think what you're talking about, once you see it, you can never unsee it, right? Once you see a team of diverse thinkers solve a problem, then you're on board. You're like, I'm never doing this differently again. Like, this is how we work best. But what about those people who face a barrier somehow?
Yeah, and I can get to that was your previous question. I think there's misconceptions galore on this topic. Okay. And it makes it challenging. And we've chosen as a company, in a sense, a challenging route, because we've never worked with a company that wasn't doing this for the first time. So it's not a well-plowed field. And of course, you have some question marks, some cynicism around making that leap. I think there's a lot of societal misconceptions that lead it to corporate misconceptions, a lot of ableism. Yep. What are people capable of? We hear people say, we could never have anybody like that here, you know, oh, maybe in our engineering department. But again, just a complete misunderstanding of the fact that humans have different brains. 20% of people are neurodivergent. Neurodivergent people can have all sorts of strengths and profiles. So fundamental misunderstanding there, but that's guiding your kind of narrow perspective on the topic. I think there's also people who, the naysaying comes from a false belief that this is a very, very kind of niche demographic, and that's partly because of that vicious cycle around people masking because they don't feel comfortable and so on. So we talked to one organization who said, and we didn't end up working with them, they said, you know, we've got 700 people, we've done a survey, there's about 2 people who've said they're neurodivergent, therefore it's not a big priority for us. You know, so it's sort of cart before the horse to some extent, you know, and I think people struggle with embracing the muddy picture of human and organizational neurodiversity. If you're a manager, you're managing a team, you might not know everybody's neuro identity, as they call it. Some people don't really have one. Some people may have a neuro identity as dyspraxic, but not want to tell you. Some people might have a brain that would qualify them for a diagnosis, but never have had access to doing that. There's lots of debate, of course, as to what constitutes neurodivergence within the human spectrum. I have a traumatic brain injury. Some people would say I'm neurodivergent. Some people say I'm not. In a sense, the one thing you know as a manager is they don't all think alike. You do a poll on how do people want to receive my instructions, you're going to get 8 different answers. So that's where you need to be operating, because that's reality. Same thing as a salesperson or customer success person. People don't walk around with labels on their heads, but they don't experience you or the world in the same way.
And again, I come back to the classroom, right? A good teacher knows how to customize instruction for all their learners. And it's not, and again, but we have the same conversation in education as well. It takes too much time. It's too complicated. It's this, it's that. It's not. It's just a question of sort of figuring out where your tweaks are and delivering what people need in a way that they can understand, right? And this is just human respect for humans.
I think there's ways you can do it where part of your proactive approach is to include everybody through so-called universal design. So, you know, what can we do? And actually learning is a huge dimension for universal design. What can we do off the bat that's going to be better for 100% of people than not doing it? And then, you know, you have room within that if somebody, a learner or whoever, has a very specific demand, that, you know, you're open to that and you can have a constructive conversation. I think people think, and this is maybe another naysaying thing to your question, I think people think it's going to be too complicated, too expensive and so on. And actually, a lot of the secret of this is just good inclusive behaviors, good management, and actually really being put into practice goes a long way.
I actually, this is completely, it's not off topic because it's related, but my husband works, you know, manages a team, and I'm going to call him out a little bit. He has people on his team who really want a lot of reinforcement and want to know that they're doing a good job. And he has people who work more or less independently who don't really care if he points out a good job. As a manager, he's got to know who's who. Again, this is irrespective of neurodiversity, right? Like, these people are individuals with individual needs and individual strengths, and they deserve to be treated in a way that's going to make them happy at work. Because why? When we are well regulated and happy at work, we produce. That has a direct effect on the bottom line, versus people who are tying themselves into knots, masking, doing whatever they have to do, not happy. They don't produce and they don't stay. So
yeah, and just I think feeling like you are valued is important, and the manager who just manages everybody like he or she would like to be managed themselves doesn't really achieve that. And we do lots of things in our company that are designed to help everybody surface and share their preferences as to how they work and so on, because that's what we've learned helps. And we had somebody join, and they said, you know, I never thought a company would care about this stuff. But what a great thing to show that right off the bat that you do.
Yeah. Can you give us like a couple of examples of how you operate in your company that you're also presumably teaching other companies to do?
Yeah, we don't necessarily teach people to do this, but we have processes and a tool where people can give preferences and share their preferences electronically. So in a sense, build a profile of themselves. That I think is becoming more and more common. That is combined with an encouragement to be open and speak up in meetings, in other settings as to your own preferences, while being very sensitive to others. And what's nice about that is those two things really dovetail. If I'm a manager and I'm happy to share that, look, here's how I most like to give instructions, the natural flip side of that is, how do you like to receive them? Because it almost, by opening up our own preferences and being able to share them, it reminds us that that's what they are. And those are not norms. Those are not sort of how you just do it. Those are how I like to work.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. There's so much more to unpack, but we're gonna sort of start wrapping it up here. If people want to find out more about you, about Uptimize, if they want to get the book, tell us all the places where we find you.
Yeah, absolutely. So feel free to come and visit us electronically at uptimize.com, uptimize.com. I also always welcome people getting in touch with me directly. So I'm at ed.thompson at uptimize.com. And the book is called A Hidden Force. It's available at Amazon and other retailers. Hope you enjoy it.
Fantastic. Ed, thank you so much for taking the time. This is, we talked earlier before I turned on the recorder in terms of light at the end of the tunnel. And I think this is, you are absolutely providing that in terms of what people who are parenting neurodivergent children, people who are neurodivergent themselves, looking to the future of workplaces that are inclusive and friendly and productive. So I so appreciate the work you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you.